Jeffrey Dahmer's murderous orgy is over. Throughout the trial that found him sane...
Welcome to our channel. Today, we're counting down the top 10 killers who were murdered in prison. Number 1, John Gayogan.
He is accused of molesting more than 100 boys, and much of the abuse allegedly came...
He was a former Catholic priest who was convicted of sexually abusing young boys. His crimes were part of the larger scandal that rocked the Catholic Church in the early 2000s.
Priest John Gayogan molested an 11-year-old boy while he was a priest at St. Julius.
In 2003, Gayogan was strangled and stomped to death by fellow inmate Joseph Druce in a Massachusetts prison. Druce, serving a life sentence for murder, claimed he killed Gayogan to prevent him from abusing more children. Number 2, Jeffrey Dahmer.
And families of the 15 men and boys Dahmer killed and mutilated held their peace.
He was a notorious serial killer and sex offender. He was convicted of killing 17 young men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Dahmer's gruesome acts included rape, dismemberment, and cannibalism. In 1994, while serving his life sentence in a Wisconsin prison, Dahmer was attacked and killed by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver.
I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself.
Number 3, Whitey Bulger.
Racketeering, conspiracy, and murder. He was arrested in 2011.
James was a notorious Boston crime boss and FBI informant. After years on the run, he was captured and sentenced to 2 life terms for his involvement in 11 murders and various other crimes. In 2018, Bulger was brutally beaten to death by inmates at a West Virginia prison. The killers allegedly used a padlock stuffed in a sock, attacking him just hours after he was transferred to the prison. Number 4, Albert DeSalvo.
Tangled with a piece of their own clothing. Albert DeSalvo admitted he was the killer, first confessing to fellow prisoner George Nassau.
Albert DeSalvo confessed to being the Boston Strangler, a serial killer who terrorized the city in the early 1960s. He was convicted of other crimes and was sentenced to life in prison. In 1973, DeSalvo was stabbed to death in his cell at Walpole State Prison. The motive behind his murder remains unclear, and some believe he might not have been the real Strangler. Number 5, Leroy Martin. He, well known as the Gaffney Strangler, killed 4 women in South Carolina in the late 1960s.
Gaffney Strangler. A look back at the terror that was happening 55 years ago.
He was caught and sentenced to life in prison. In 1972, Martin was stabbed to death by a fellow inmate. His killer claimed he wanted to rid the world of a man capable of such horrible crimes. Number 6, George Jackson. George Jackson was a political activist and member of the Black Panther Party. He was convicted of armed robbery and later accused of killing a prison guard. Jackson's writings and activism made him a controversial figure. In 1971, he was shot and killed during an escape attempt from San Quentin State Prison. The circumstances of his death led to widespread protests and debates about prison conditions and racial injustice. Number 7, Mark Chopper Red. He was an Australian criminal and author known for his violent behavior and colorful personality. He was convicted of numerous crimes, including kidnapping and armed robbery. In 2013, while serving time in prison, Red died from liver cancer, but he claimed he had been poisoned by other inmates. Number 8, Donald Harvey.
The man accused of beating a local serial killer to death in prison could soon face charges in that attack.
He, well known as the Angel of Death, was a nurse who confessed to killing at least 37 people, many of whom were patients. He claimed to be easing their suffering.
Known as Cincinnati's Angel of Death, 9 on Your Side first reported the man behind dozens of...
In 2017, Harvey was beaten to death by an inmate in an Ohio prison. His death brought an end to a dark chapter in medical crime history. Number 9, Richard Loeb. Half of the infamous Leopold and Loeb duo, was convicted of the 1924 murder of 14-year-old Bobby Franks. Loeb and his partner believed they could commit the perfect crime. In 1936, Loeb was slashed to death by a fellow inmate at Statesville Penitentiary. His killer claimed Loeb made unwanted advances. Number 10. Frank Gusenberg. He was a member of the infamous Chicago gang led by Al Capone, was involved in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. In 1929, Gusenberg was killed in prison by another inmate. His death highlighted the violent underworld of gang warfare in the early 20th century.